Uh-oh.
I sent them an email a week ago. How are you? Good to see you. How are you?
How are you?
Yeah.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. Had a lunch meeting, a lunch presentation on my back.
Okay, good.
You know.
Are you guys going to storm ahead?
Yes. We also are very interested to
Make
hear from you.
you bring in British MPs.
Yes.
I don't know why they're not.
Most of the time there are a lot of MPs.
I know. I don't know why no one's
UK.
here. I know.
Sir Ian Smith.
Ian
and also Helen Kennedy.
Helena, of course.
And
Nusgani.
yes, and also a lady.
No, Helena Kennedy is Baroness.
Yes.
Nusgani is MP. Ian Duncan Smith and Alistair Carmichael. He's also in IPAN. Yeah, each one for different
I was
reasons.
discussing with the organizers.
I put 2 bento boxes over there for you and your daughter. Ah, bon appetit.
Save some food for my daughter because she's not.
Yeah. もろに桜井やった。はい。3人。
Sorry.
No, it's alright.
I was discussing with the organizers that human rights are global and they are not, let's say, limited by sovereignty. Mm-hmm. So the lady had to turn the page and she couldn't say or discuss about the fact there is an interference and so on. So because once you are a member and you are providing information and feedback into the UN HRC mechanism, basically you accept that the human rights should be the same global issue, not something that's. So and the lady understood that, and also I paid a lot of, let's say, respect to the Chinese culture because I tend to be interested in, let's say, in Asian cultures. And actually, it's not about. It's about being against some governments, about helping some people to develop themselves.
Nicely phrased.
And at one moment they said, you know, that both you and me were children in communist countries where it was very complicated to get food for your children. So the parents suffered because of that, and we as parents suffered because our children suffered because of that. But now the situation is way more prosperous both in China and Romania and some other countries, so we should be happy about that. But some other now people want more than food, want to belong to some communities, to practice the religions, to be happy with what they have, and also to have some, let's say, ways to develop themselves. So we are here exactly for that. And she said, indeed, I was a children of the Cultural Revolution, and I know how. So basically, at one moment, one level, we connected because the chief of the political section decided not to come, and it was just the number 2 in embassy, the vice ambassador, whatever. She was able to signal, from my point of view. I mean, I tend to interpret it like this. One, it's, let's say, the governmental and that's the official matter. I need to deliver a message, but I'm a human too. From my point of view, I can. So I think we should try to have this kind of approach.
Yeah.
Because from my point of view, Chinese people are very smart people. So they understand what happens there. It's complicated for them to navigate, but I'm sure most of them, they are not totally agreeing what happens? And you say one more freedom. It's impossible to have something like 500,000 students going abroad each year, and then to say you'll be able to have a close system.
Yeah, but if you're in the morning session about this transnational regression,
Uite în mâncarea. Dar cred că va desfășura uite acolo unde sunt alea, unde sunt pentru. So, yes, transnational repression.
so the session this morning on international repression, and they were saying the long arms of the CCP means that no one can.
They are using it also.
Express political
No, but they
theories.
know that you can't remain silent. So they actually have to say something.
This is just a conference.
So it was an interesting discussion, and I made a few jokes. I said, I have some tea from your governor in Taiwan, Miss Tsai Ing-wen. I met her. And she gave me some tea, so maybe we should share it.
That's a good joke. Did she drink the tea with you?
No, not enough. I mean, probably should drink. I'm not sure I'll drink their tea they give me.
Yeah, right.
One, yes.
Yeah.
But,
Kıymetli hanımlar, efendiler, Halkara Hukuk Parlamento yasaları uçuşu başlandı.
ご来場の皆様、ただいまより国際ウイグルフォーラム各国国会議員間の国際会議を始めます。
Ladies and gentlemen, the session at the International Uyghur Forum Global Parliamentary Convention is now starting.
We need to know.
Can we get a mic?
Yeah,
At least one?
the selling point.
I think for some people it's the only purpose.
Making a selfie. And,
Yeah.
Here. I'm allowed.
Oh no, okay.
Good afternoon. I hope we're all satisfied in our stomachs and in our brains from these last day and a half. Can you hear me? No? Funny, my kids say I'm really loud at home. Can you hear me now? No?
yeah, you need to push on it. Yeah.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, good. So I'll start again. Good afternoon, everyone. Lovely to see you here. My name is Mia. I am the Executive Director of Renee Kassan. We are a Jewish human rights organization based in the UK. We use Jewish experience and Jewish values to advocate on behalf of other minorities. And for the last 5 years, Renee Kassan has led the Jewish community in the UK to be the leading faith community working on the Uyghur issue. And I hope I convey on behalf of myself, Renee Kassan, and the Jewish community that we are with the Uyghur people in solidarity by experience and in friendship, in shared hope. And that's, that is why we're here all together. And it's a real privilege for me to have been asked to host this interactive dialogue on the cost of inaction, atrocity crimes on the rise. How did never again, that significant phrase that emerged from the Jewish Holocaust in 1945, become almost always again? And just to give a privilege of being the moderator, I'm gonna do a small introduction, probably bringing the Holocaust narrative in, just to set the scene, and of course leave it to the all-male panel, which in the future is not going to happen, to talk about different perspectives. So in a little over a month from today, on the 9th and 10th and December, we're going to celebrate two significant 75th anniversary. On the 9th of December 1945, the UN passed the Genocide Prevention Convention, which was designed to prevent further persecution of groups. On the 10th of December, the day later, 1948, Monsieur René Cassin, a French Jewish lawyer, introduced the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And it was the first time that a set of principles of ethical values was introduced as the new starting point for a world order based on justice and fairness and peace. Both didn't exist before 1945. That's why 6 million Jews were murdered, and hundreds and thousands of Roma and Roma Gypsy and disabled and gay people were also murdered. Sorry, get my notes. The absence of both of these both the declaration and the convention were envisioned and drafted by Jewish lawyers. The Genocide Convention was envisioned and coined by Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, and the Universal Declaration by Monsieur René Cassin. And joining them was Hersch Lauterpacht, a third Jewish lawyer, Polish, who coined the phrase crimes against humanity. And in 1945, right after the Holocaust, with the International Military Tribunal, with crimes against humanity, was the first time that perpetrators were held accountable under international human rights law for the crimes they committed during the war. Hell of a legacy set by these three individuals. So we've got a legacy, we've got a framework. And you know, on the 9th of December, 2021, when Sir Geoffrey Nice read the judgment of the Independent Tribunal, where they found the CCP guilty without reasonable doubt on the crimes of torture, crimes against humanity, and crucially, genocide, I was sitting in the audience and I was thinking, what if this existed in 1938, when the Western countries met in France in the Avian Conference to talk about the Jewish refugees who by then had experienced 5 years of persecution in Germany and in Austria and in surrounding countries, but there was no framework to help them. And what if in 1944 there was a genocide convention? So when Rudolf Verba, who escaped Auschwitz and witnessed the crematoriums and the Jews being sent to the crematoriums, what if the US State Department believed what he said and was held accountable by a genocide convention? How things would have ended differently. But that wasn't the destiny then, but we have, it has set a different destiny since. That was a really nice vision. Unfortunately, we know it hasn't materialized. And since the Holocaust, never again has become again and again and again, from persecution to crimes against humanity to genocides on groups of people around the world. So to help us explore a little bit the dynamic between, we have a convention and there's opportunity for action, yet states continue to make the choice of inaction. I'm really delighted to have this list of speakers with us who will help us explore this topic. I think I've been told each speaker has about 8 minutes. I'm not going to stop you because it's part of having a conversation, and then we'll open it up to the audience for any comments, reflections, or questions you have for anyone on the panel. So I'm just going to start in the order of how we're sat here in the table. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Ryan Thum, Senior Lecturer in East Asian History at the University of Manchester. And if I understood correctly, Ryan, you're going to talk about the correlation between inaction as opposed to the action of Chinese policies in East Turkestan and Tibet.
Yes.
Did I get it right?
Yes.
Great.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. Hürmetli Uyghur dostlarıma salam. And good, 8 minutes. I prepared 5, so that will let me go a little off script here and think a little bit about the 1930s and the 1940s. One of the interesting lack of parallels to today is that in 1938, the U.S. ambassador was recalled from Berlin. I believe that was in the wake of Kristallnacht, which is a stark contrast with what we've seen. You know, yes, the U.S. has been a leader in actions raising costs for China, but it pales in comparison to what the U.S. did even before the death camps began operating in Germany. Nonetheless, the U.S. has been a leader. So I want to look a little bit at, you know, what correlations exist when we look at what the outside world has done to raise costs for China for their atrocities policies, and how China has changed their policies over the last 7 years now. So the question to us are what are the costs of inaction, and many of these are obvious. You know, that inaction permits the continued suffering of the hundreds of thousands or millions of Uyghurs who are in some sort of imprisonment now, and a whole host of other policies that go along with that I'll talk about in detail. It is continuing to permit the re-engineering of Uyghur culture. It's obviously not too late to act in ways that could lead to people being freed, and to interrupt the efforts of the Chinese government to stop the transmission of Uyghur culture, which is a policy that's going to take decades to achieve. So even in this sort of nightmare scenario in which we can't achieve a really substantial change in Chinese policy for another decade or two, the rewards of achieving that change are still very high. Because if we can get change in the next decade or two, which would be a very a tragic situation to wait that long, that leaves a lot of scope for Uyghurs in the Uyghur region to reconstruct their culture. And of course, there are costs to inaction globally. Other states are watching what happens to China. There's a reverse side to this. Of course, if there's no action toward China, it may lead some leaders to think that they can get away with similar kinds of atrocities. But there's also a kind of an opportunity here, somewhat perversely, because if the second most powerful or country in the world can have other states standing up to it and imposing costs, we can maybe get a sort of an even China effect. I know Sophie Richardson has said if this were any other country but China, things would be going much differently now. But there's also, I think, a bit of a sense that's possible for leaders in other countries to say, well, if even China can attract some costs from outside governments, then how much more danger is it for us as a less powerful country? And so I think that's another incentive for other governments to act more strongly in the face of the Uyghur genocide. Okay, so now let me turn to my narrower, more specific points. In August, Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken announced sanctions on officials involved in the colonial boarding school policies in Tibet. And I looked to UHRP's handy list of all the sanctions that have been imposed for Chinese policy in Eastern Turkestan, and found that there have been no sanctions levied against anyone involved in the boarding schools in the Uyghur region, which is an interesting disconnect. We have, about 2 years ago, a new leader in Tibet, a new party chairman, who was transferred from Xinjiang and was involved in the policies in the Uyghur region. So we have a sort of dark natural experiment here to see what kinds of region policies will be imported into Tibet. And we have not, for example, seen large-scale re-education camps, which is why those sanctions were not levied on people involved in the situation. That the Chinese state has learned to avoid those particular policies. As I mentioned, there were no sanctions attempted on the Chinese state for the child separation boarding school phenomenon in the Uyghur region, and they have built that up to a really large scale in Tibet. If we turn back then toward the Uyghur region and look at what has changed there, we can see, in my mind, a similar correlation. Now, of course, these are complex events that have other causes. For example, much less securitization language in Tibet. So there are different goals by the party. Language in Tibet. So there are different goals by the party state. But I do think the correlation is tight enough to suggest that there may be a relationship between action and inaction from outside states on what's happening. So just to briefly tour through what has changed in the Uyghur region, the re-education camps it seems that most of them have been decommissioned. I'm not convinced that all of them have. That doesn't mean that people are not imprisoned. Of course, there's an enormous number of people in formal prisons, and probably a substantial number, perhaps in the hundreds of thousands of people, moved from the re-education concentration camps into the prisons. But the energy that they have put into decommissioning these buildings, many of which are now left empty, some of which have become schools, I think is a pretty clear sign that they are concerned about the views of people outside of China. Surveillance has become much less visible. It's still all-encompassing, but it's important to remember that the visibility of surveillance is part of how surveillance works. So this is, in some ways, a kind of compromise on the part of the state. But those colonial-style boarding schools for children have not only not stopped, but they've been growing. You can still find construction bids for new schools, expansions of schools. And I think it's really important that not only have they not stopped growing, but the Chinese government has not even attempted to hide them. So if you look for data on births in the region, as I believe Adrian Zenz mentioned in another panel, you will find that it's virtually all been scrubbed from the internet. If you look for prison construction documents, you're going to have a very difficult time finding them. But if you look for boarding schools, they're all just out there in the open. And that, to me, makes at least a compelling hypothesis that inaction on this particular issue can be seen reflected in the Chinese state's actions on the ground, which have now been exported to Tibet. And that is about my 8 minutes. So, oh no, it's 9, sorry.
Thank you, Ryan. I'll now pass on the virtual mic to Srad Hanand Sital, Chairman of Global Human Rights Defense. And Mr. Sital will talk about the cost of inaction as it points to the creation of a climate of impunity for crimes and lack of justice for victims.
Thank you.
Please.
I think it's an honor. Can you hear me? Thank you very much for having me here. As a human rights defender, I'm always disappointed what is happening in the world, especially at EU level, at the European level, at the Dutch national level, and at UN level. Because as we discussed and as we mentioned before, never again was a magic word. I think it's magical, it was powerful, but it's become always, ever again. And if we remember the genocide before, continued Rwanda, recently Yazidis, Srebrenica, and the ongoing genocide, silent genocide in eastern Turkmenistan occupied by China, and also in Tibet, it's clear that our inactivity means that it's all related to ignorance of the world, that we connect human rights with business. We, as the West, I'm talking from the West, we saw China and when they occupied Tibet that, yeah, China is a big inland market, economic growth, so we will accept that. And that create a platform for China to continue his way of human rights violation. And we really feel that it's injustice has been created by us. We all accepted that, and we are all responsible for that. We should take action, and we always wait till our government do that, but we should be more active. And it's very hard to accept that children are being taken away from family. You remember, think about it, that your child is put in boarding school and you cannot be with your child. Is one of the basic human rights, that a child should be with a family and not being taken out in any boarding school, even if it's a 5-star boarding school. See, we see that, and I think it's first very hard to explain to people, to say that what is happening there is against any human rights treaty that China is signed. And unfortunately, the country that is part of the UNHCR, as part of the National Assembly from the UN, the country that is been accountable for so many human rights violations, extreme human rights violations. And I see that as a fight that we can win. The only time that we say that we should be united and bring our government accountable. We have challenged the Dutch government to say what you are doing for against the Chinese government. You can see you can make money, but you have your responsibilities. Our responsibility should be to say, yes, okay, just like now we are doing with Ukraine. We have stopped the gas import from Russia. We are paying more gas prices, and we are suffering in Europe because we don't have the energy comfort zone. Why it's not happened with China? Why we are so much in that mindset that we cannot do it with China, we can do it with Russia? Is it that Europe, the problem of Europe is more closer, so we feel it's important for us? Is the problem of Europe a world problem and problem from the Tibetan local problem? As long as we start looking at that, we cannot, that if it is our responsibility, we should do that. And personally, I feel that we are all ineffective. We feel every time that we are meeting each other with promises, but today and tomorrow you'll get new reports that say that the situation is getting worse and worse. And again, there is one country, and the country is not the world ruler, but part of the economic power. I can give you on paper that in 2-3 years, again, China will be the economic partner of all European Union, and they will continue with their business, and we will sacrifice people for business. And as long as we don't make a choice that human right is our responsibility. So I would ask everyone to ask your own government to take a decision what you can do for the people from the Uyghurs, for the Tibetan, and all the other places that is also affected by extreme human rights violation. But I will tell you one thing, that I'm so surprised if I see Mr. Dolkin speaking in conferences. That person has suffered so much. He has lost his family. He has a wonderful study. He is forced to go into human rights. For us, is human right a hobby? We study human rights. But these people are forced to go into that human right defending. And he never used force. He never used aggressive word. He never called for extremism. And I think that is why probably people don't see him in Europe, that he should get more platform. And what we see that more aggressive you are, more platform you're getting, more media coverage. And we are living in a world now that we lost humanity. There is no humanity at all. I think we are accepting that. And if you know that women are being sterilized and forced marriage, bounded labor, and still we are keep buying things from that region because it's cheaper. But we as a person has a responsibility to say, this is important, this is my choice. And coming to that, the cost of this ineffectivity is, I don't blame the government. I think the world citizens should make a choice how to stop this immense human rights violation against the Uyghurs, the Tibetan, and that we always ask ourselves what our government will do. But we should ask ourselves what we can do and how we can influence our own government to act as they should act. Because every time when I'm in the UN, I feel so disappointed. It looks for me really, I don't know, it looks like me the Muppet Show. They all have the show, but there is nothing happening at all. It's all people are coming from different countries to speak there. Last time, Mr. Vulcan spoke 1.5 minutes in the UN, and he's been stopped 3 times by the Chinese officials. That even in the UN, you cannot speak 1.5 minutes about your human rights violation, what is happening to you. What is the value of any institution that was being created to protect of all and to give guidelines? People are coming there because they see an institution. They say, this is what going to protect, and what is happening to us? It's a political game. 5 people are saying yes or no, and still you cannot make your statement from 1.5 minutes. I think we should reform the whole system, but I personally, I don't think I'm gonna see it. But ineffectively, I think yes, genocide was 4.5 years in Germany. This is the longest genocide ever happening to these Uyghurs and in Tibetan. So we should recognize it as a long and very extreme genocide against the Uyghurs families members who are really suffering in this time, in this modern age. People, we thought that we will be a better human. We have better system to follow and to get control people, but we are. I think we got worse, and I think after the Second World War we got more genocide than ever before, and I think that makes us human. That we should think about it. That what is our purpose of life on this earth? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Sitan. I just have to interject. It feels really frustrating because I think, like me, you can sense the frustration, the anger, the sadness. And it's difficult to say, but there's hope. But I just want to remind everyone, when Herr Schlotterpach stood in the Nuremberg trials, it was during the trials that he discovered, as the defendants were sitting in front of him, that every single member of his family, except for one niece, were murdered in Auschwitz concentration camp. Monsieur Cassin, when he coined this framework of universal human rights, did it while in exile in the UK, and 29 members of his family were murdered in France. Raphael Lemkin coined the phrase genocide while his family was back in Poland being murdered. Yet they still had that almost conviction to set a hopeful legacy for all of us. And I think part of the frustration is, how dare we fail that legacy? And I think that echoes very much what you said. So it's almost like personal to me, Ms. Yuka-san is a hero. Hersch Lauterpath, Raphael Lemkin, those are my human rights heroes. And it's almost like we're failing them on a personal level, let alone that system that they created so many years ago. Okay, next speaker. Sorry for that interjection, but it's difficult to separate the head from the emotion, from the stomach. Our next speaker is Professor Yun Kumakura. Sorry. Professor Satoshi Hirano. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Hirano Satoshi, the Tokyo University of Europe. Nice to meet you. I'm Satoshi Hirano in Tokyo University. I have researched China's ethnic minority issues, especially focusing on the relationship between Tibet and Beijing. Today, I would like to think about the effects of ethnic problems in China over the past 13 to 14 years, such as Uyghurs and Kazakhs, and the failure of Western countries to stop them. In ethnic minority societies during the Mao Zedong era, the traditional society and culture were destroyed in the name of socialism, and poverty became widespread. In the case of Xinjiang, there was also the issue of the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps stealing land from ethnic minorities and monopolizing resources. However, in the early 1980s, during the era of General Secretary Hu Yaobang, the unique societies and cultures of ethnic minorities were once again valued in order to restore their productive capacity and move them out of poverty. At one time, education in ethnic minority languages made great progress due to the policy that educational development would lead to economic development. Also, during the Mao Zedong era, most mosques were destroyed. But as economic development began and people with increased incomes competed to make donations, they were quickly rebuilt. As part of the rediscovery of ethnic minority cultures, research into Uyghur and Kazakh history, culture has also flourished in Xinjiang, mainly at universities. However, the essence of the system in which the Communist Party leads the state and society remains unchanged. For this reason, in light of changes in the domestic and international situation, the Communist Party increasingly tends to punish movements that it deems to be problematic or the stability of the state and society. In response to the situation in Tibet and the Uyghurs, which have become increasingly unstable since the late 1980s, as well as the collapse of socialism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and ethnic conflicts, the Chinese Communist Party has been considering how to prevent national disintegration and to prevent separatists. Then they paid great interest to strengthen their patriotism and social stability. Then they spread the propaganda that this is because Western countries have had a negative impact on people in the socialist bloc through freedom, human rights, and attractive popular culture. Today, Xi Jinping's administration is intensifying repression, calling out the influence of external forces like Xi leader Huai Yingxiang, and promoting national security and social stability. But this is not new. In fact, the rails for Xi Jinping's reign were laid on from this time. Then in Xinjiang, with the progress of economic growth, the Han population was increasing, and the conflicts are increasing due to economic disparity. In 1996, Mrs. Rabia Cardiel, a member of the National Political Consultative Conference, raised the issue of ethnic minorities in Xinjiang and criticized the centralism by Han Chinese. Then she was punished. Since the late 1990s, patriotic education has been enforced throughout China. In ethnic minority areas, the focus has been on separatism and criticism of the foreign powers behind it, including the West and Islam, Dalai Lama. Such methods are far from relieving the disparities that ethnic minorities actually face and the discrimination based on the centralism by Han Chinese. Without freedom, there would be no open dialogue, and the gap between China's mainstream society and ethnic minorities deepened. The result was the Tibetan independence movement of 2008 and the Urumqi incident of 2009. Professor Ilham Tohti, who continued to call for dialogue through the website Uyghur Online, has been severely punished. However, Western countries have continued to view China based on economic interests and have not directly faced the possibility that the negative cycle of ethnic minority issues and Communist Party dictatorship could have a negative impact on various aspects of China. Furthermore, they continue to be involved in the Chinese economy with the baseless idea that if society and the economy opened up and the middle class increased, China would naturally liberalize and democratize like newly industrialized Asian countries. As a result, as China's economic power rapidly strengthened and economies of the Western countries were no longer going as well as they once did, China finally began to make no secret of their true intentions and use economic pressure against countries that criticize China. As a highly symbolic incident, I will never forget the Chinese boycott of the French company Carrefour, which took place in 2008 with French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who was sympathetic to the Tibetan independence movement. However, as many countries became independent of China's economic power, following the Lehman shock that occurred in the same year, this issue was once again forgotten, and the 2009 Urumqi conflict did not attract much international attention. In this way, the Chinese Communist Party, which increasingly linked strong power and economic development, began operating freight trains from China to Europe through Xinjiang and even advocated One Belt, One Road initiative. At one time, many European countries were attracted to its economical appeal, but in Xinjiang, which is on the front lines of China, since 2014, strict control over ethnic minorities has become even more severe under the slogan of maintaining social stability. Finally, since 2017, many people in Xinjiang have been punished or taken to concentration camps in the name of civilization. Then, inheritance of Islam, Uyghur, Kazakh society, and culture is facing a serious crisis. Why is today's harsh repression occurring not only in Xinjiang and Tibet, but also in Hong Kong and whole China? And why has Western countries been forced to consider decoupling or de-risking in a hurry? I consider that part of the responsibility lies with Western countries, and the problem of continuing to provide profits and technology without seeing through the true nature of the Communist Party system is serious. Rather than the superficial win-win lip service shown by the Chinese Communist Party, we should judge the state of China based on what they actually say and do. And we should make the right choice to shine a light on people who are suffering, such as ethnic minorities, Hong Kong, and liberal persons in China. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hirano. And finally, last but not least, Professor Yoon Kumakura, Professor at the Department of International Politics, Faculty of Law, Husei University. And you're going to talk about your book that explores Chinese internal debate around the definition of genocide.
The rule of East Turkestan by Chinese genocide.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'm Jun Kumakura from Hosei University, a private university located Beijing from here. And I'm Japanese, but I have this robot here. I'm not ethnic Uyghur. I'm ethnic Japanese. And as parliament member, Miss Eli Alvia, said the day before yesterday that Japan is a unique country among the G7 countries. Originally in Japan, there are many people interested in ethnic issues, including East Turkestan problem, and before World War II, even before World War II, Japan was in contact with officials of the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan in 1933. And this year is celebration of 90 years of East Turkestan Islamic Republic. Anyway, after the World War II, academic regional studies also continued, and many Japanese tourists have been to Xinjiang, East Turkestan. There is a wide base of interest in East Turkestan, this issue. Of course, being interested is not the same as taking action. As Chairman Recep Ahmed and Dr. Ako Tomoko mentioned in yesterday's session, there is a huge division in Japanese society, and honestly speaking, it's very difficult to join such action for many Japanese people. However, Professor Hirano contributed to research on this field, and I'd like to talk a little about my research. I am the author of this book. This book is the title is Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region: 70 Years Ruled by Chinese Communist Party. And this book describes the history of Chinese rule in this region, East Turkestan, focusing on the 70 years of under the communist era. And it was published last June and sold more than 12,000 copies in Japan. And the Chinese version was published in Taiwan and in February of this year. It was published by Bashi Publishing House, and its general editor, Dong Bianji, its general editor is Mr. Fu Cha. You might know Fu Cha. He was currently detained in Shanghai, arrested in Shanghai. Last month, a Turkish edition was published in Turkey. Its translation was the responsibility of Dr. Kutluk Higashito. Maybe some of you might know him. The reason for writing this book is that there has been no comprehensive history of the CCP's rule of Xinjiang. there was a lack of books on the political history of East Turkestan, including Western ones. For example, on the relationship between Muslim communists who studied in the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of China, on the appointment of ethnic minority elites during the Cultural Revolution by the Communist Party of China. Then there are the protests and the student movement of the 1980s. And of course, the process of massive structure of repression. All of these are of interest to Japanese intellectuals, but there was little commentary for the general public. You might be confused because it is different from the West. The Japanese situation is very different from the West. 90% of Japanese people are not familiar with China. But at the same time, criticizing China is not seen as a good thing by many Japanese people. For example, the term genocide is not actively used in Japanese newspapers or in TV or anyway. It is considered a term used by activists. And of course, Japanese intellectuals are aware of the seriousness of this issue. They are aware of the seriousness of the ethnic problem in East Turkestan even before it is referred to as genocide in the West. But they have, the Japanese intellectuals have different way of expressing it in the West. The last chapter of my book deals with this issue. Many Japanese intellectuals are aware of the tragedy of the Xinjiang issue and do not take the side of China. However, many people think that when they are taught by Westerners that was genocide, then it might be their view. The Japanese worldview is incompatible with the Western dualistic view of good and evil. So I changed my method and the method of explaining. In my book, I first laid out that the Xinjiang issue is multifaceted. Then, as a matter of international law, I argued that some issues, such as birth control, amounted to genocide under international law. By doing so, my argument was fortunately accepted by some pro-China, even pro-China scholars. Another point, the extreme assimilation into the Chinese nation, 中华民族, Chinese nation, is a very important phenomenon, not seen in previous genocide. The governance of Xinjiang by Chinese Communist Party is very different from typical ethnic cleansing. It is not a story where the target ethnic group is simply killed. Some are killed, and some are imprisoned for life. But the majority are not killed and must live as Chinese nation. They must speak Chinese, and they must participate in labor, including forced labor, under the rule of Communist Party. From this point of view, I have described the CCP's rule more grotesque than previous genocide. When I was interviewed by Radio Free Asia in Taiwan, when I published my book, I remarked that the problem in Xinjiang is an evolution, a kind of evolution of genocide. It's like genocide 2.0. China has responded to Western criticism by claiming that the ethnic minorities of Xinjiang are living happily And for example, that Kashgar, which has been turned into a tourist destination, has been beautifully redeveloped, even though none of it is what the locals want. Imposed happiness, post remodeling, I would call the structure in which they are forced to live as Chinese nation genocide 2.0. Thank you very much. This is my.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That leaves us almost half an hour for comments, questions, reflections, any thoughts. I've got some guiding questions if anyone wants me beyond what has been triggered by our speakers here. But please, the floor is yours. And I think we have roving mics around the room. Yes, Mr. Lega, can we, is there a microphone, please, to Mr. Here, just. Thank you. Thanks, Alexa. I've turned it on.
Let's see. Yes. Thank you so much. It's a very, very important and timely discussion that we're having. I think that I'm trying to phrase the question while I'm speaking. The political courage to actually define something as genocide varies in many different occasions. I know, looking at the European Parliament, I serve as a member of the European Parliament, sorry for those who don't know. It took me 3 years of placing amendments to actually finally gather the political support needed for the European Parliament to recognize the ongoing genocide in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs. So it took a long time, and honestly, I don't think it would have happened without Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, where Europe suddenly started to lose its naivety towards China afterwards. But my question is sort of almost the opposite, that are we doing it right? Are we, and please take this the right way, because it might sound provoking, but that's not my intention. Are we overusing the word genocide and creating a lesser value of the meaning of the word genocide, which makes people hesitant to dare to use it? For example, the ongoing situation in between Israel and Hamas, where, in my opinion, I also have a Jewish background. I have complete support for Israel, but I think that both sides are overusing the word genocide, both when it comes to Hamas horrible attacks against Israelis, and also when it comes to Israel's defense activities in Gaza. So are we thereby destroying the word ourselves by calling too many things genocide? I hope you understand my question.
Anyone want to have a first go?
I'm happy to talk about that if others are. This is a serious consideration that I know at least the small community of scholars who specialize on the history and culture of the Uyghurs struggled with. Of course, that is the very reason why it takes a lot of courage to use the G word, as people have called it. I think it's important to recognize, though, that there's a very long history of people using it loosely. It happens all the time. I don't think we need to get. I mean, of course, we police this socially. I personally don't feel like that the loose use of the word is increasing. But I do think it's important, and maybe this is not so directly at what you're saying, but I do think it's important to look very carefully at the Genocide Convention itself. There was a lot of resistance to the use of the word genocide in the Uyghur case because it didn't involve killing. And The Economist magazine actually came out and said, well, the Genocide Convention may say that forced prevention of births is enough for genocide, but that's not what most people think. So we shouldn't use the word genocide. And I think the reason it's important to stick to that convention rather than sort of popular or lay preconceptions is exactly